Okay, so I was looking at this graph that was put on Uber's website today, and I thought it looked too good to be true. How amazing that Uber drivers make more money than any other type of transportation driver. But I knew from my own experiences as a rider that Uber didn't cost that much. So it seemed weird that Uber was really cheap as a passenger, but yet Uber drivers make so much money. How does that work? Well, we did some math to find out the facts that Uber doesn't want you to know. So here's the sad truth about the type of driver that is on the road for Uber right now. This is an image from Uber of the rates that drivers make in LA, 90 cents per mile. Now, Uber has cut pay to drivers in Detroit all the way down to 24 cents a mile, but we're going to stick to the 90 cents LA example for now. So I wanted to calculate how much Uber drivers actually get to keep out of that 90 cents per mile. Let's have a look. So first of all, Uber takes 25% of the cut for new drivers that signed on to drive for Uber from Q3 2015. So now we're down to 67.5 cents per mile. Then you have to deduct tax because Uber doesn't withhold tax on your behalf. So in some LA counties, sales tax is as high as 10%. And since Uber doesn't withhold taxes for you, the drivers are responsible for keeping this money aside to pay the tax department come April. So with the 10% deducted, we're now down to just over 60 cents. Now we need to factor in depreciation of a car. So a car is an asset like anything else and will eventually wear out and you'll have to buy a new one. Every mile you drive decreases the value of your car and brings you that much closer to needing a new one. This is a big problem if you drive for a living. You're going to need to buy a new car every 2 or 3 years, and the cost of a new car is pretty significant. The IRS estimates that the cost to drive a vehicle for work purposes is 54 cents per mile, and this is broken down into fuel cost at an average of 12 cents per mile, depreciation at 24 cents per mile, repair, tires, and maintenance comes down to about 9 cents per mile, and insurance, license, registration, finance, fees, all of that stuff averages out to about another 9 cents per mile. So with the 54 cents depreciation, repairs and fuel accounted for, we're now down to just over 6 cents per mile that actually goes into the hands of an Uber driver. Now, given that Uber also asks its drivers to pay for things like bottles of water and gum and phone charges for its passengers, we can say for certain that driving for Uber pays well below minimum wage, or even worse, costs drivers money, as is seen directly in this actual fare that Uber charged one of its drivers. So given that the math is so bad, why would anyone want to drive for Uber? So here's an example of a post an Uber driver put on Facebook. He was $400 behind in the rent and he needed to make that money up really quickly. And in a way, Uber is kind of like a loan scheme. This driver gets $400 in his hand, but he doesn't realize that come tax time, he's going to need to give some of it to the tax man. And he hasn't factored in fuel costs or the cost for repairs or the cost for buying a new car in the future. This is exactly the type of driver that Uber wants. They're desperate for cash and they don't know enough about how Uber works to set aside some money for taxes and vehicle expenses. For these sort of drivers, Uber might be a good deal. They get cash in hand today, and sure, you're going to need to pay some of that back in taxes and car costs, but you get immediate cash to solve your immediate needs. So who cares? So for some people in desperate circumstances, that 6 cents a mile that Uber is offering might be an acceptable deal. But for most people, driving for Uber is a waste of time. I wish Uber would be more honest with people. By our calculations, the amount you're making an hour driving as an Uber driver is nowhere near $19 per hour. If you drive 30 miles per hour at 6.75 cents per mile, you're only making $2 per hour. By far the worst choice of any transportation job. And this number is not just my maths, it's also supported by the site Not Cool Uber, who have tracked hourly earnings to around $2.89 per hour. And after vehicle fees are taken into account, that number is around zero. Now, I'm not against carpooling services. We all need transport. And I know that I'm a frequent user of Uber and Lyft. But I think Uber is going about it in an unethical way, which makes me unethical for supporting them as a customer. Uber could easily fix this situation by reducing their commission, or by making rates more reasonable, or by giving riders the option to tip their drivers like we do in hospitality. or just by being more transparent. But that would mean admitting that they've generated significant revenue from effectively exploiting their drivers. So the truth is, Uber benefits from maintaining this status quo. Uber's currently reported to be making $10 billion a year in revenue. And that money has to come from someone. Just don't let that someone be you. But what do you think? Are you an Uber driver, an Uber passenger? What's your opinion? Have you got horror stories of your very own? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Hi everyone, I'm Jade Lovell, resident science nerd on the Young Turks Network. You're watching SciQ and we know you don't want to miss an episode, so please click the subscribe button down below.